Welcome to Plain Civics. I'm Joe Ulery.
And I'm Bobbi Fisher.
And we're here today to teach you how the government works and how we, the people, can be better citizens. Our topic today, Bobbi, is what does democratic republic actually mean? And I can't wait to get into that because I'm still confused myself. But before we jump into the topic, it's Fast Five and it's your turn. It's your round.
The Fast Five.
All right. So for Bobbi, vacation or staycation?
Vacation.
Night or day?
Night.
Passenger or driver?
Driver.
Okay. Teacher or student?
Ooh, that's a hard one.
Yeah.
Because I like to learn. But
Done both.
I'll say teacher.
Yeah. But you are a lifelong learner. That's
I am.
one of the things I love most about you. And last one, air guitar or air drums?
Drums.
Drums. All right, that we would make a perfect air band because I would do air guitar. All right, so thank you for doing that. We know a little bit more about Bobbi now. So let's jump into the topic because I feel like no matter how many times my teacher told me this in school or how many times I've researched it or read it, it just doesn't get through my thick brain. People always be like, well, we're a democracy.
We are, but it's not as simple as just being a democracy. First of all, don't let the words Democratic Republic confuse you. They really have nothing to do with our two political parties, even though they sound like it. In fact, those weren't even our real original political parties anyway, Democrats and Republicans. But the word democracy comes from two Greek words, demos, which means people, and kratos, which means rule or power. So democracy literally means the people hold the power, or rule by the people, sometimes you'll hear it. And the power in a democracy can be held either directly or indirectly, and we'll get back to that in just a little bit.
Okay.
But that's where we kind of make the difference between just being a plain democracy and having to add that word republic onto the end of it. And this all originated 2,400 years ago with the Greek city-states. They were the first ones to have a democracy or a democratic form of government, though theirs was direct.
So we're looking back, and it's hard for me to get my brain around this. We're looking back 2,400 years. Mm-hmm. So this seems like a time-tested working thing. So let's talk about that.
It's gone through a process. There haven't always been democracies. You know, if you think of the Roman Republic and different time periods, kings, you know, there were, in Europe especially, the monarchies,
Yep.
which with kings in charge, and people really didn't have any power, most people anyway, under those types of governments. But that's kind of in something we're going to go into more in our next episode, is different types of government, so that people can understand why our founders decided to go this route. Some characteristics of democracy are, first of all, equality before the law. So we hear all people are treated equally under the law.
As a member of the LGBT community, I think we have some work to do there.
We do.
We
and
do.
Lots, not just with that community, but
all the communities. It's Black History Month. This is February. I always like to say we're not done. We're not perfect. We're still always trying to be better. So equality.
Supremacy of the law. The law is above all else. We have human rights. The government guarantees those rights. Impartial tribunals, which basically is simplified the impartial justice system. So you don't have like just random people deciding, off with his head. You know, we have to go through a system where you have judges to determine those things.
It's interesting when you talk to young people these days because I think there's a disconnect somewhere between, well, there always is, right? We've lived experience, so we have experience, but one of us can't just decide that person's making me mad, so I'm going to go take that person off the streets and take their life and go on with my life, and there are no consequences. So I think that's a good example. It's not up to us to decide.
Exactly.
There are people that are chosen and put in those spots so that there is equality in the eyes of the law.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, you have a problem, you take it up with an authority who deals with it. You don't deal with it. You don't take out your own retribution on people.
And that's a good place, too, for both sides, criminal court, and it's the state versus somebody that's a normal citizen. Facts. Both sides get to present facts and evidence. It's not just some random decision. It's all based on that. And I love it that we're based on law. Impartial tribunals, you mentioned that, and the impartial justice system. And then
the last characteristic is civic education. People, even back 2,400 years ago, realized the citizens have to be educated about their rights and responsibilities.
And we talked some about that during the last podcast.
The first 2 episodes were all about that.
Yeah, the whole point of starting education was to create smarter, more informed people so we could sustain the government and have some continuity from generation to generation.
Exactly. So people, if you don't understand how the government works and what your duties are as a citizen, then eventually it's going to fail.
That's scary.
It is.
You mentioned when we started the podcast today that we would jump back. You had something more to tell us on a point. Let's jump back.
So looking at the democracy part of the Democratic Republic, there are 2 types of democracies. In both of them, power is still held by the people.
Talk about how this worked back in ancient Greece.
Back then, they had what's called a direct democracy. That means citizens had to participate directly in the decision-making without an elected representative. And of course, back then it would have been men only, but they had to gather all of these people anytime a decision needed to be made for them to all be present and to discuss and decide and vote.
What if there was an emergency or a disaster? In that scenario, it sounds like you have to take the time to gather the people.
Right.
And we have to remember, we remember this, I know you and I do, but information was slower to make its rounds back in the day. There was not an internet.
Right.
There were not podcasts. There were not radio stations. So that context too talks to how there are some flaws in that design.
And of course, they weren't necessarily as big as like the United States, but they had to do a lot of planning in order to decide when these meetings were going to be, that the men that could vote got together to make these decisions. So direct democracy is one, but every person that's eligible must participate in that type of democracy. So then we also have what's called indirect democracy, where citizens elect their representatives who make decisions on their behalf.
And is that what we have?
Yes, and it's also, we usually hear it referred to as a representative democracy.
Okay.
Indirect and representative are interchangeable, and in this day and age, we usually hear it referred to as a representative democracy. So, thinking of that, which term defines the United States? We are an indirect democracy or a representative democracy. And that's because the framers realized, like you were talking about a few minutes ago, a direct democracy would not work in a country that was growing as rapidly as the United States was by the 1780s. Remember, we gained our independence in 1776. And even back then, it took until 1783 for that to be official. The Constitution was written in 1787. So by the time the framers wrote the Constitution, states now ran all the way up and down the East Coast, and were starting to flow towards into the Appalachian Mountains and beyond. And as you said, there was no rapid transportation, there were not phones, there wasn't telegraph yet. It took a while for people to get places. So they realized that not only the area size of our country, but the number of citizens was growing rapidly, that it would be unrealistic to have a direct democracy. So amount of land, amount of citizens, lack of transportation and communication, that would require an assembly of representatives in one location to meet periodically and return home. You hope everybody can get there. They just decided that that was not a realistic way to set up our new government. So that's where we bring in the term republic. The term republic refers specifically to a government where citizens elect their representatives who govern according to the law. And the law, of course, is the Constitution. Now we're back to where we started. In a democratic republic, which is what the United States is, the people, or the citizens, hold the supreme power. Remember, democracy, rule by the people. And they exercise that power through their elected representatives. So that's the republic part.
Okay.
Or, if you want to, an indirect democracy. The representatives are elected by the people in periodic free elections, and that part is important as well. So the representatives that we elect are supposed to be representing what the majority of the people they represent want in government.
And so therefore it's important in that kind of system, and I know I harp on this every episode and people are probably rolling their eyes into their top of the head, but it's like, how does that work if you're not hearing directly from the people who's relying on you to make the decisions? So it's important for us to communicate with our representatives.
Exactly. If they don't know what you want, just because you voted for them, or, especially if you didn't vote for them.
Even then, yeah.
You still need to tell them, how you feel about certain issues. Otherwise, they're going to vote based on what they want.
Based on what they want, and maybe one side's more vocal about it. And so they're running to tell that representative, and that's all that representative is hearing from that side of the issue. So that's where there's this balance that you have to find your voice and you have to convey your thoughts so they know. And I really still feel today they appreciate hearing from us to see what we think.
I just heard, actually I think it was this morning, but yesterday as well, that there have been in the last week or week and a half a lot of calls going into members of Congress. Much more. We're talking, I know one senator said they normally get 40 calls a day, and they were receiving upwards of about 1,500 calls a day.
Say that again.
Her office normally receives 40 calls a day.
40.
And she's been receiving upwards of 1,500 calls a day.
Wow. I think that's good.
If you don't let them know how you feel, again, they're going to go with what they believe most people want. And you're not always going to get everything you want. That's one thing we have to keep in mind. But I also think, I hear people say every election, well, don't complain if this happens or this happens if you didn't go vote, because you have no basis to complain if you are not
participating in the exercise.
Exactly. And even if you participate, you may not get what you want, but you at least have more of a chance of doing that. The same thing is if there's an issue that Congress is struggling with or whatever, they can't read your mind.
No. And it's not fair to expect them to. We're in Logansport, Indiana today, my hometown. And I know you grew up nearby Howard County?
Kokomo. Mm-hmm.
So these are our parts. And we're proudly recording today at the Logansport Cass County Public Library. And I'm driving from Westfield, and I knew what our topics were going to be today. And I thought, what kind of a world would it be if there was no give and take and that your way was always the highway? I made this decision. That's how it's going to be. You live with it. Like, what kind of a world or society would that be where your voice is the only one that counts?
Well, in the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Perfect.
About some different types of governments that are possible.
I feel like that we've sort of gotten a little bubbly into that over the past 20 years to sort of where, like, we forget to take into account other opinions, or we get horse blinders on how we believe that we're not even open to hearing the other side of it. And I don't like that.
It has gotten worse, and it's kind of a cycle. We can look back and see other times in our history where that's been the case. And that's one of the things I hope we're doing here, is trying to help correct that.
We talked about this in a previous podcast. It's okay to feel one way today, and then some new information comes to light, and next month we decide, you know what? I was wrong on that, or now that I'm better informed on that, I feel differently. And I feel like if we remember each of us is human, each of us is different, we're not all the same. I mean, everybody says how boring of a world would it be if we were all the same.
Exactly.
But just respect is something I think we need to think about.
It's okay to change your mind. If you find out new information, there's no sin or whatever in saying, yeah, like what you said. Well, I read up on this and I see your point now, or I see why that's more important.
And there are always going to be new facts. We evolve, and there's science, and things are going to change.
Right.
And my request to our listeners is just be open to facts and be respectful of others. What if it were your daughter or your grandson or your mom? What kind of compassion and empathy would you expect from others in your neighborhood or in your city? That's sort of where my heart is.
It's harder than it's ever been.
It is. There's like this force out there that thrives on putting out disinformation to discombobulate us. And there are so many different media platforms that exist that it's like there's this bombardment from all of this. So how do you cut through that to know where you stand and how you feel?
And that being the case, if you're depending upon only one media source, for example, to make your mind up about things in this day and age, that does not work.
I don't know that it's been a case where it's ever worked. Think back, put your teacher cap on and think your English teacher says, all right, I need you to write a paper. It was not acceptable to just use a single source.
Right. You can't go get the World Book and just copy out of the World Book. Yeah, you have to use several sources, compare different ideas. Like I remember a long time ago when I was in school writing about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Looking at the time, of course, this would have been back in the 1970s. We were only not even 20 years out from his assassination, but there was quite a bit of information already out there. In my paper, I had to look at some of the different ideas about, was there more than one gunman? Was there someone else besides Lee Harvey Oswald up in the book depository? Was there someone on the grassy knoll? I mean,
you have to be open to different possibilities. If you are just marching through life and feel like you already know all that you need to know to make any decision in any case, in any investigation, I think that's just a tip to keep your mind open, to use a couple different sources these days, because it's so easy. You love to wake up with the same personalities on the TV in the morning. Sometimes maybe just flip the channel to see what the other people are saying, and are they covering the same topic? Is the lead story the same, or are they upplaying it or downplaying it? I think that that's a good audit of keeping track of information flow.
That is definitely an important point. Also, it's kind of human nature to think that you know it all.
Right?
and
like, if we did,
and
man,
you don't want to be wrong. Right.
Yeah.
But sometimes people are wrong, and so people need to be open to that.
And it's okay to be wrong.
Exactly.
And I find it endearing that when you're wrong, if I come to you and be like, okay, do you remember the podcast we did 2 podcasts ago? I was so wrong on that. And there's sort of like this healing that happens when you can go to somebody and say, let's talk about this. I was wrong about it. Can we revisit it? Man, we get off so easily into, you know what I mean? It's like, we got to stay focused. So we've talked today about the Democratic Republic. We've talked about the importance of our representatives, and I knew it. You have some sort of a reference to Abe Lincoln because he's your favorite.
I do. And this, I think, is one of the best quotes ever, and it kind of brings us to the idea of a democratic republic or a democracy. At Gettysburg on November 19th, 1863, in Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address, one of the most famous lines is that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. I think we need to remember that, shall not perish from the earth. So if we want to keep this, and we kind of go back to Ben Franklin, it's a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it.
Right.
We need to start thinking more about being more engaged and understanding how all this works, and remembering that this is a government of the people and by the people, and we need to elect representatives that follow that ideal, listen to what the people want.
Now, today you have, I don't want to call it breaking news because I'm probably late to the party, but you have new information that you think that our listeners should hear, and it involves an app that you've discovered.
If your representatives don't know what issues are important to you or how you feel about certain things, it's our jobs as the citizens to let them know that. And I just found there's a phone app that's called 5 Calls. It's the number 5 and the word calls. If you go to your app store, you find it there. It's a free app. It has a list of issues, and it even has scripts that go along with those issues, and you enter your location, and it calls up your congressional representative and senators, and you can make calls. It'll connect you to them, to their offices. I put in my Logansport zip code, and then it pulls up the 2 senators for Indiana, and our representative here is Jim Baird, and so it connects you to their offices. They say calling members of Congress is the most effective way to have your voice heard, next to going directly to their regional offices or to their office
I feel
in
like
DC.
that would be the most effective, is just show up and stand there.
Well, and they say, even going like to their regional office, they have people there manning those because they have people on their staffs that actually have to keep track of, so-and-so called and they want, they're in favor of this or they're against this.
It's good to know that somebody's keeping track of that. It's time for a pop quiz. It's time for the Plain Civics pop quiz. Bueller.
So last episode's question was, what do we call the first 10 amendments to the Constitution?
Can I guess?
You can.
Okay, man, I hope I'm not wrong since we're doing the podcast, but is it the Bill of Rights?
It is the Bill of Rights.
Okay.
So ding, ding, ding.
Yeah,
if you answered
said.
Bill of Rights, I had a couple people online ask me or in person, and I'm like, yes, that's correct.
So what is our new question?
So our new question, name one of the 5 rights or freedoms guaranteed in the First Amendment to the Constitution. So there are 5 of them. I'm just asking you to name one of them.
I'm going to have to write that down. All right. So I feel like last podcast's episode was an easy one for me, but I'm going to have to put some thought into that one. So there are 5 possible different answers?
5 possible answers.
Okay.
Yes.
That only leaves one question. What will we talk about on episode 4?
Why the framers decided to create a democratic republic and not one of the other types of governments or forms of government.
If you've got questions, you can check us out on Facebook and search for us for Plain Civics. The other thing that we would love it if you would do, if you're listening to this and you're finding it informative, educational, or you just think we're silly and you like to hang out with us and listen to us, would you please go to the podcast platform and rate us. So, Bobbi, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to the Logansport Cass County Public Library. I was here when I was 4 or 5 years old. I was part of the summer reading club, and it's just so cool to be back here in this building today. We'll see you soon.
This is Plain Civics. Join us for the journey as we break down the basics of how government works so you can make the government work for you.